Great. Welcome, everyone. Oh, there is a echo. Welcome, everyone. This is the International Peace Coalition. This is our 133rd meeting that we've had consecutively. Thank you all so much for joining us in this process. My name is Anastasia Battle. I'll be your moderator today, as well as Dennis Small. And a special thank you to all of the people who have been part of this for the last 133 weeks, and a special invitation to new people who are joining us for the first time. Please join us during the discussion period and introduce yourself. Let us know where you're from, if you're with any groups, and if you're doing any activities or have any initiatives or ideas that you would like to contribute for the dialogue today. I like to remind people why we created this forum, just to start off every meeting so we have this in our minds as we're discussing. We created this forum in order to unite the international peace discussion, the international peace groups, many different people of different philosophies, whether you're in government, whatever religion you're from, whatever language you speak, and bring people together in order to have this dialogue so we can coordinate our activities to actually accomplish true peace in the world. Because as you have seen, as many people have seen, and we'll hear more today, we are very dangerously on the cusp of thermonuclear world war on many fronts. And this is not something that we want to see happen with the annihilation of humanity. So if you are for this mission and creating true peace on the planet, you are welcome here. And please take a moment to share the invitation, whether you're on over YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, X, whatever broadcast this is going out to, or on the Zoom. Please share it with your friends, your family, your organizations, your reasonable enemies, and bring everyone on so we can be part of a discussion today. We will have a number of opening speakers to start off the first portion of the discussion, and then we'll go into a general discussion with the audience. But to start us off today, we have Helga Zepp-LaRouche, who is the founder of the Schiller Institute and the initiator of the International Peace Coalition. Please go ahead, Helga.
Thank you, Anastasia, and hello to all of you. Well, these are tumultuous times, and the famous EU summit, which was supposed to make a decision to grab the Russian assets for, basically continuously financing the war in Ukraine, just took place. And despite the fact that Chancellor Merz declared victory afterwards, it's very far from that because of massive opposition inside the European Union, and also some warning signs from elsewhere. They failed to do that, and instead they agreed to basically lend 90 billion to Ukraine, which is basically going to be paid by the taxpayers from Europe. So the opposition was naturally Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, but also the Austrian parliament voted strongly against that. And the rating agency Fitch warned the Euroclear bank that they would be risking downgrading if they would go ahead with it. So as a result, they could not get the vote together. And basically, this is definitely a sign, that if they go ahead with it anyhow, which Merz claims is still a background option, which I don't think is the case, it could trigger not only massive Russian retaliation, but it would undermine the credibility of the European Union banking system in such a way that it could be the final get-go for a collapse of the system. Now, this was a very typical example for the kind of arm-twisting policies the EU is implementing these days. Von der Leyen just told every EU member that they cannot leave until a decision has been made. So it took altogether 16 hours and in one night until 3 o'clock in the morning before they actually reached a so-called agreement. Berliner Zeitung reports that part of the money is actually needed to pay back 45 billion from G7 credit of last year. So they take a credit to pay a credit to pay a credit. Now that is generally known as a Ponzi scheme and criminally liable, at least for an investigation. So this is definitely no victory for the European Union, but naturally the whole Ukraine situation remains hanging in the air. The Russians are making massive progress on the front lines. Zelensky is clearly betting on the Europeans to continuously prolong the war,
pour continuellement prolonger la guerre.
French interpreters, please go on the French channel.
Despite the fact that, you know, all military experts are agreeing that this is virtually an impossibility simply because of lack of manpower. Now, with the famous line that this was an unprovoked war of aggression by Russia, something interesting happened as well, and that is that Amanda Sloat, who was the special advisor to Biden, and she had a position in the National Security Council, thought she was called by two advisors of Zelensky. And in this discussion, she admitted that, you know, it was clear to her, to Biden, before the war started, that if Ukraine would have agreed to give up on NATO membership in January 2020, that the war would have never happened. And it was also clear that if Ukraine would have accepted the peace deal negotiated in Istanbul in March, April 22, the war could have been ended then. The only problem was it later turned out these people calling her, taping the conversation, were not advisors of Zelensky, but they were the famous Russian pranksters, Woven and Lexus, who had already tricked several other politicians believing they were talking to Zelensky. So I don't know why these people are not getting more smart, but that's the case. But that admission that, you know, this is not Russian propaganda, if you say that, but these are the secret thoughts of President Biden before the war broke out, I think is going to be very interesting, at least for historians down the line, if not for the present politicians. Now, the other major crisis naturally is the still pending US invasion of some sort in Venezuela. Now, 2 days ago, Tucker Carlson had, you know, spread alarmism by saying that, you know, he thought that the State of the Union speech, not State of the Union address, but the national address, which President Trump later would give at 9 p.m. that evening, would be the announcement of a US invasion in Venezuela. Now, the whole world was on the tip of their toes. It turned out that President Trump did not even mention Venezuela, but he only gave a 20-minute speech praising his accomplishments or that of his administration, blasting all problems being the result of the Biden administration. But, you know, he did not mention that. So, you know, however, the alarm is not yet called off. There is massive opposition among the MAGA base against any such invasion, and a lot of international pressure had come down from Russia, from China, from Lula, from Brazil, from President Sheinbaum, from Mexico. So there was a big combination of, you know, warnings that this would open up a disaster, but we don't know if this is, you know, not going to happen. A land invasion, full land invasion, is very unlikely because the United States would need very, very much larger numbers of soldiers to do that. But it cannot be excluded that a limited operation still is being planned, including, you know, a move against President Maduro. Now, the other major story which I want to highlight this week is actually foreboding potentially some really dangerous development, and it is a dangerous development already, and that is that the European Union sanctioned the Swiss analyst Jacques Beau. Jacques Beau is one of the most respected and objective military and political analysts internationally. He's respected in the United States, in Europe. And what is the accusation? That he was basically retailing the Russian narrative about Ukraine. Now, I saw several programs of Jacques Beau on video, and I can tell you from my best judgment, he is not partial, he's not pro-Russia, he's just an objective analyst who did not want to repeat a narrative of which he knew by the facts that it was not true, namely that the Ukraine would be winning this war and that Russia would suffer a strategic defeat. So he kept, analyzing the facts on the ground, and it is unbelievable. This is now, he was sanctioned. His bank accounts were frozen. He, being a Swiss national, cannot travel inside the EU around anymore. He's residing in Belgium, in Brussels. He's not allowed to leave Belgium. It is a complete scandal, because all this man has done, to my best knowledge, is to try to have an objective analysis about a war which potentially could lead to World War III. And his only crime is that he had an opinion which was different than that of the official narrative. Now, if that continues, and it is not the first case, we had the sanctions by the EU against German journalists living in Russia, Alina Lipp and Thomas Röper, and there are actually a whole number of less famous journalists from, with European passports, but maybe African background or some other background. So there is right now a very clear effort to just forbid any different opinion. And when the investigative journalist Florian Warbeck, who is a member of the Federal Press Club in Berlin, was asking the official German government if they would back up this decision by the EU, they just completely flatly said, yes, we do, and that anybody who is doing similar things should be aware that the same thing could happen to them as well. Now, this is unbelievable. This is an expatriation of a European citizen. It's the muzzling of the freedom of the speech. It goes against the EU Charter. It goes against the UN Charter. It goes against the German Grundgesetz for sure, against the First Amendment in the United States. And it has to be regarded as a very grave development which should be taken up. And, if this is not changed, the next person the EU will sanction is Pope Leo XIV, because he condemned war and he said only peace is holy. And, if they put the Pope on the sanction list, then the whole world will hopefully wake up, or hopefully before. Now, I think we need, therefore, to absolutely continue our efforts to try to unite the international peace movement, because these are all extremely alarming signs. And, given the absolute continuation of the willingness of the armament and rearmament, one can only put the alarm clocks on the highest level. Now, just to end with a slight positive note, we had in my call to use the fact that the head of the military commission of NATO, Admiral Dragone, had called for a preemptive attack on Russia, and the fact that the NATO propaganda unit had put out this absolutely incredible PR video in which they claim that war is forever part of the nature of man, which I absolutely reject as a bestial image of man, which we cannot accept and which is propaganda but not reality. I had used that to call for replacing NATO with a new security and development architecture, which must take into account the interest of every single country on the planet for it to work. Now, in that, obviously, we are still promoting this call. I ask everybody on this call to sign it, to continuously spread it to all your networks, family, colleagues, social media, because we absolutely have to have a different approach to international politics, a new paradigm where we overcome geopolitics, because geopolitics has been twice the cause for a world war in the 20th century. And if we are not stopping this insanity, we may end up with having no humanity at all, because we all will be dead. Now, extremely important was the youth conference we had last Sunday, and I'm very happy that we will have some speakers from that participating in that conference speaking today. So the youth is called upon in the whole world to take responsibility, because if the establishments are driving the world towards war, they have no right to take the future away from the young people, and therefore they have to step forward and play a much, much larger role. So that's what I wanted to say in the beginning.
Excellent. Thank you, Helga. And I've included your statement for people to endorse in the Zoom chat. Withdraw from NATO, new national security strategy requires new security architecture. So please check that out. If you're on over the broadcasting, go to schillerinstitute.com. So thank you very much, Helga. And people, please check that out. And we shall continue with our agenda. So next, I'd like to bring in a good friend of the IPC, Jack Gilroy. He's with Veterans for Peace, Pax Christi, Upstate New York, and Pax Christi International, as well as, I believe it's Stop Killer Drones as well. So thank you so much, Jack, for joining us. Please go ahead. You have the floor.
Well, it's always a pleasure, and I just have to congratulate the Schiller Institute for so many weeks of talking of peace and justice. I don't know of any other organization internationally that has been so consistent in pushing ahead the idea that peace is possible. And so, again, it's an honor really to chat with you. I want to really focus as well on some of the young people who might be listening. I am, of course, is an age where I'm probably older than most of their grandfathers, but that's okay, because I was one of the original of many millions of hundreds of thousands of NATO forces in Europe back in 1955. And I'd like you to sort of concentrate everyone there. Every year is important. There's no one year that just is the most important. There's so many standout events. And as a history teacher, of course, I know that some people, some students would say, "Oh no, not more of that." History, remembering specific years. But the year's 1955. If you could think of that, if you can think of the years 1962 and 63. If you could think of 1989 and 1991, and then jump up to 2014, and then 2024, and think ahead to 2045, I think that would help us out. As a young infantryman in the 350th Regimental Combat Team along the Czech border in 1955, we sometimes would be called out early in the morning for an alert with live ammunition, not knowing if this was the time that war was going to start. In the brightness of the day, as the day went on, usually there would be at least one or two Austrian boys who would come up to us and say, "Ruski kommen, ja?" And we would shake our heads and say, "Wir hoffen nicht." We hope not. The Russians coming? We hope they're not coming because we know that we would be sacrificial lambs. We would be run over by the opposing forces on the other side, the Russian forces, etc. That didn't happen. But 7 years later, by then I was a teacher in a middle school. I eventually taught in a middle school and a high school in a place called Indwell, New York. And in 1962, in October, I think all of us know that important date, was when the threat of Armageddon, really the end of the world, was at hand. And in 1962, the Russians, as you probably know, you students of history, moved missiles, quite likely nuclear missiles, to the island of Cuba. And President John F. Kennedy was in a showdown with the president of the leader of the Soviet Union, the USSR at the time, Nikita Khrushchev. And negotiations began. And in the middle of it, the Pope of the time, John the 23rd, his illustration is here with Kennedy, The Peace Sowers is the title of the painting. He came in as a middle person to try to help negotiate with JFK and with Nikita Khrushchev, and it worked. Since then, I feel that I have lived a theology of resistance to violence, a theology of resistance against nuclear weapons. I have been arrested, in fact, at nuclear facilities for simply saying it cannot continue, it cannot go on. Even as a teacher, I had students with me who watched me as I climbed fences over a nuclear facility, and they took videos of it, but didn't tell the local authorities who the Santa Claus was because they knew my job would be on the line. But after that, in 1989, the Soviet Union, which had said that it would stop testing nuclear weapons and did, and the United States would not. Finally, in 1989, the Soviet Union ended. The Berlin Wall came down, and it appeared that the arms industry was in trouble, that finally we would be working toward peace, that there would be economic conversion, meaning you would convert from making items of war, systems and products that kill and destroy, rather than enhance life. And there was a joyous feeling that something positive was happening. In 1991, my students at Maine Indwell High School, in a course called Participation in Government, which in New York State is a mandated course for seniors in high school, 17, 18-year-olds. My students said, let's have a conversion, a town hall called Economic Conversion. And we did. And we called the local, and the students called and wrote letters to the local impacted defense industry, a very big impacted defense industry. We live in an area where IBM, the master computer company, started. This is where it began. General Electric at that time was a major munitions and ammunition facility. Lockheed Martin was not around yet. It was Martin Marietta. Later on, Lockheed Martin would take it over. They were appealed to come. Link Aviation, a small aviation company, but nevertheless a training company, Link was aircraft training company. They were the only ones who replied and sent their president to our group. And he agreed with the discussion. The students had people from the audience express their views. And there was a sense of gratification that now there was the time to start making and producing things that would improve life, not help destroy life. But that wasn't what the Merchants of Death wanted in 1991. They had a great opportunity then to say, you know, the Soviets, or now the Russian people, the Soviet Union had fallen, that we would not, and they proclaimed, the Americans proclaimed, the Europeans, including the Germans and French, that they weren't going to move in on Russia, on New Russia. Russia had made all these agreements for the bringing together of Eastern and Western Germany as something that they thought was finally a good thing. So peace was in the air. But again, the merchants of death would not allow that at that particular time. And we know that this dates back to the year that we kind of skipped here in 1963, because after Kennedy's put down after the settlement of the Cuban Missile Crisis, John F. Kennedy gave a speech on June 10th, 1963 at American University. And in that speech, he called for total disarmament, which was a shocker, an absolute shocker to the merchants of death. And he said it again at the United Nations, New York City, in September. And then, of course, he was murdered on November 22nd of 1963. He said at the time, a year before that he would like to take the CIA and shatter it into 1,000 pieces. Most historians would say, most historians pretty much have it nailed down, that it was the CIA, the powers behind the CIA, that killed John F. Kennedy. Who were they motivated by? Who were they taking orders from? We don't know, but we have a pretty good idea. And of course, the smiling merchants of death throughout the United States and the world that make the weapons do not want Russia to be a friend. They wanted Russia to be an enemy, because the thought of repeat business, of course, is best for profiteers. So in 2014, there was a great opportunity here for finally saying to the Russians, we're going to stop the encroachment. We're not going to move any further, because the Western nations had already broken the promise that they wouldn't move an inch toward Russia. That was a total lie. American troops in Poland, these even sailors in Poland, US sailors, American troops in Poland, in Romania, US nuclear weapons along the border of Russia. Nothing like that occurs. There are no nuclear weapons along the border of the United States, of the Russians, along the Mexican border, the Canadian border. But there is the United States, the leader of NATO, forcing themselves on the Russian people. The Russians who in 1955 said, we will move out of Austria. We will move out of Austria because that has been the gateway to invasions by the West of Mother Russia. And so they decided to leave Austria. They were the ones who initiated the treaty in 1955 to move out of Austria. So the British, the French, the Americans, and the Russians all left Austria a buffer state, now a buffer state, so that the West would not use it as an entranceway to Mother Russia. But here we are in 2014 with all of these European nations led by the Americans, right? They are puppet states pretty much of the Americans, led by Americans to pressure the Russians. In 2014, just as Helga was noting that year as well, the CIA again, right? The CIA was involved in having an overthrow of the elected government of the Ukraine, which had shown some favorable movements toward Russia to try to get Russia to say, no, we won't dare invade because we don't want you to be a NATO member. But instead, the movement toward NATO began in 2014. And in 2000, of course, when the war started, even before the war started in February of 2022, American merchants of death met. You can check this online. It's all true. They met with their stockholders and said, it appears that war is going to happen, and this is going to be very favorable to our stockholders. That was the truth for sure. That was one of their truths, because stock markets soared once the Russians invaded the Ukraine. So here we are then in 1924, last year, with American weapons, advanced missiles being given to the Ukraine and penetrating deeply into Russia. Penetrating into Russia in this war that the United States was supporting. The risk of that was just phenomenal. I have a hard time believing that people would still say today that NATO is important. They took the whole world. They put the whole world back into a position similar to what it was in October of 1962 with the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's amazing that the Russians had some attempt to have sincere ways to try to get around an actual nuclear war, the sanity that is sometimes not shown by actions of the United States and the NATO nations was held by the Russians, and they held back from pushing even further on that point. We can't agree, we can't accept that they will always do that as we push more and more against Mother Russia. Young people in our group, young people in our society, I just remember that I forgot one thing about the Cuban Missile Crisis. My students, I'm speaking to students here, some of my students were so upset in the year 1962 that one young girl, 15-year-old, took a bottle of aspirin. They found her in the girls' room, right, prostrate. They took her to a hospital, pumped her stomach out, survived. She did survive. But you've got to realize just how that emotion, how that feeling of the possibility of your life ending, of the world ending, is not just a fabrication. We came very close to that. So here we are with young people, the Alpha generation coming up, the Z generation showing itself as a powerful, wonderful generation, far beyond that so-called greatest generation of World War II is what it will be once it comes together and begins to realize that they have the power, that they have the sense of justice, the sense of purpose, the sense of compassion and love that seems to be lost upon so many other older generations. So we ask you that by 2045, that yes, the United Nations will not be in New York any longer. It will be in Istanbul. The United Nations will have two houses. One will be a General Assembly with your leadership, right, with all nations of the world participating. Is it a dream? Sure, it's a dream. But it's also a dream that the Security Council, now that is in control and blocks almost every just movement of the United Nations, that it will become just an advisory board. And we hope that the names of Eleanor Roosevelt will be remembered, that the names of John F. Kennedy and Senator and Pope John the 23rd and Nikita Khrushchev and Lyndon LaRouche will all be remembered at this future time. So think of 2045, but think of it even as earlier. Start now. You don't have to wait until then. Start now, and many of you have, to move toward peace and justice and away from the sanity of war. The lie, the narrative in our country of the United States is that militarism somehow makes us secure and safe. It's the big lie. It's the Himmler lie. It's the lie that has been used in the past. Don't believe it. It is not keeping you safe and secure. Only peace and justice will do that, and you have it in your hands. And bless you that I hope that you are able to do that and work in future years as young people of whatever nation you happen to belong to. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Jack, for your contribution to the discussion today. I'm sure many of the young people are very excited to be on, and maybe you're not older than our grandfather. You're definitely as old as some of our grandfathers, but definitely a lot more feisty than some of our grandfathers. So we greatly appreciate that. So next I'd like to bring on Professor Eduardo Siqueira. He's the...
No, I'm supposed to go next.
Oh, okay. So we made the adjustment again. Okay. So we'll bring on Dennis Small of EIR, of the Ibero-American Desk, and also the Schiller Institute. Go ahead, Dennis.
Okay, thanks. Jack, I'm really glad at the very end you said we didn't have to wait till 2045. That was a great relief to me, since all of those things really are in motion now and have got to be done soon. On the question of Venezuela and the new national security strategy document of the United States. Last night, President Trump gave an interview to NBC by telephone in which he was asked if war against Venezuela was still on the agenda. And he said, no, it's not ruled out. So we may have dodged the bullet with that national TV address that Helga mentioned, but this is an imminent danger. If you look at what Stephen Miller, the Deputy Chief of Staff of the White House, and one of the craziest members of the inner core of the Trump team, and that's saying a lot, he wrote on his X column the following a few days ago. American sweat, ingenuity, and toil created the oil industry in Venezuela. Its tyrannical expropriation was the largest recorded theft of American wealth and property. These pillaged assets were then used to fund terrorism and flood our streets with killers, mercenaries, and drugs. Close quote. Now, if that is the excuse and justification for invading and seizing Venezuela's national oil industry, which was nationalized in 1976, then I would suggest that the following list of countries should prepare for the same. Mexico, nationalized in 1938, Iran, 1951, Brazil, 1953, Argentina, 1958, Iraq, 1961, Myanmar, Burma, 1962, Indonesia, 1963, Peru, 1968, Bolivia, 1969, Libya, 1970, Algeria, 1971, and Nigeria, 1979. That's the clear implication of this kind of madness that grips part of our administration. I think it can arguably be said as well, since there is a fight within the administration over these policies, that Marco Rubio has been probably the leading proponent of getting Trump to walk right into this trap, and it is a trap. It can arguably be said that Marco Rubio is trying to do this both to put the bloodshed on Trump's doorstep on all of this, besides the fact that he does want to see this kind of activity, but also with that to enhance his own possibilities to run for president. It's pretty clear that Marco Rubio's presidential ambitions are in an inverse square proportion to his stature, both physical and moral. Now, it's very important to take a look at what the National Security Strategy document of the United States said. This was issued on December 4th. And what I intend to do is to just put some quotes on the screen for you to read. Don't go by secondary sources in which you read. Let's actually look at what that document says. And the best way to understand it is to look at it in comparison with a document that was just issued by China policy paper on Latin America and the Caribbean, or LAC, which by happenstance was issued a week later on December 10th. It wasn't in response to the NSS document. It was in preparation for some time. But just compare the two worldviews we're talking about here. The NSS document, which does say that Europe is walking down a path towards its own disappearance, which is certainly true. And whereas it does call for strategic stability with Russia, was extremely important, and does want peace in Ukraine, nonetheless has within it a geopolitical outlook. And that germ of geopolitics is best expressed in what it has to say about the Western Hemisphere. It treats the Western Hemisphere as subjects or serfs. And the whole approach, as stated explicitly in the document, is to achieve a kind of balance of power internationally. Now, that's the phrase and the concept used by Henry Kissinger. And that's completely the opposite, totally distinct from the idea of a new architecture, a new security and development architecture, which the Schiller Institute has been promoting. And you'll see a reflection of the same in the Chinese document. So let's compare these two on four aspects of this, which I've selected out. You should read both documents in full. But one point is the overall goals. The second is what are the financial parameters each is looking at. The third is what is the attitude towards the Western Hemisphere. And finally, the most substantive one is on the question of the economy. Now, let me first bring this up on the screen for you to see, and that should be up there now so that you can have a look at that. Just read through this with you. On the overall goals, this is what the U.S. National Security Strategy document says on the left. We want to protect this country, its people, its territory, its economy, and its way of life from military attack and hostile foreign influence. We want full control over our borders, over our immigration system. And we want a balance of power. The United States cannot allow any nation to become so dominant that it could threaten our interests. So this is a clear expression of the America First type of approach. Compare that with what the China policy paper towards Latin America and the Caribbean says by way of goals. They call for a universally beneficial and inclusive economic globalization, promoting the building of a community with a shared future for humanity. They want equality, mutual learning, dialogue, and inclusiveness between civilizations, and champion humanity's common values of peace, development, fairness, justice, democracy, and freedom. They want a common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security. In other words, not security for one country at the expense of others, but a common, comprehensive security. In other words, indivisible security. Now let's quickly look at what each has to say about the financial side of things. The U.S. national security document says that the world's leading financial system and capital markets, including the dollar's global reserve currency status, is what they seek to preserve. The United States boasts the world's leading financial and capital markets, which are pillars of American influence that afford policymakers significant leverage and tools to advance America's national security priorities. Preserving and growing our dominance entails leveraging our dynamic free market system. Now, mind you, this dominant global financial system is the one that's got $2 quadrillion of absolutely illiquid speculative assets, which is blowing apart. China's approach is very different. They say efforts will be made to enhance dialogue and cooperation between the central banks and financial regulatory authorities of the two sides, China and the Ibero-Americans, expand cross-border local currency settlement, discuss renminbi clearing arrangements, and steadily promote monetary cooperation, including local currency swaps. And they say that the two sides will discuss cooperation on panda bonds, in other words, issuing bonds denominated in renminbi to help capitalize these countries. Now, what's the attitude towards LAC, Latin America and the Caribbean? Well, this is really the what has caused a huge commotion about the national security strategy document, and rightly so. It says, we want a hemisphere that remains free of hostile foreign incursion or ownership of key assets. And we want to ensure our continued access to key strategic locations. In other words, we will assert and enforce a Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Parenthetically, I would just offer the necessary corrective. That's really the Trump corollary to the Roosevelt corollary, because the Monroe Doctrine had a totally different approach. But we'll leave that aside for the moment. The document goes on to say, rigid adherence to non-interventionism is not possible. Let me translate that. That means we're going to invade anywhere we damn well feel like it. Rigid adherence to non-interventionism is not possible. We will deny non-hemispheric competitors the ability to own or control strategically vital assets in our hemisphere, military installations, ports, and key infrastructure. In other words, they're talking about China and the Belt and Road and the BRICS countries and anyone outside of the United States that's in this global South grouping will not have the right or the ability to help this region develop. Here's what the China LAC policy paper says. China is ready to carry out trilateral development cooperation in LAC countries. Now, I really want to emphasize that. Trilateral development cooperation. What are they talking about? Well, not only the Latin American countries and China, they're talking and they are open to third countries, i.e. the United States. This is, again, the open Chinese offer to the United States and to Europe to join in this process of development. So they say that China is ready to carry out trilateral development cooperation in LAC countries with relevant countries outside the region and international organizations under the premise that such cooperation is proposed, agreed upon, and dominated by countries in the region. China welcomes more LAC countries to join high-quality Belt and Road cooperation. so as to achieve modernization of peaceful development. And finally, the fourth point is really the most substantive, is the question of the economy. What is being offered to this region by these two completely diametrically opposed worldviews and views of what the global system should be? Here's what the national security document says. Expanding American access to critical minerals and materials, while countering predatory economic practices. We want other nations to see us as their partner of first choice, and we will, through various means, discourage their collaboration with others. Perhaps a various mean is the presence of, in the Caribbean, of the USS Gerald Ford, and the largest military force ever gathered in the Caribbean. It's about a quarter of US military capabilities altogether. So through various means, we will discourage their collaboration with others, utilizing US leverage in finance and technology to induce countries to reject such assistance from countries like China. We should make every effort to push out foreign companies that build infrastructure in the region. Here's what China says about the economy. Energy development and utilization across the whole industrial chain, increase cooperation in oil, gas, and other traditional energy sectors, and deepen cooperation on peaceful uses of nuclear energy. We will actively explore establishing mechanisms of long-term supply and local currency pricing, not free market. Long-term supply, state-to-state, long-term supply and local currency pricing and settlement of energy and resource products so as to reduce the impact of external economic and financial risks. And they continue. Planning and construction of infrastructure in LAC countries so as to enhance regional infrastructure connectivity and consistently empower regional economic growth and sustainable development. Science and technology innovation. Support will be given to young scientists from LAC countries to carry out short-term scientific research in China. And finally, make good use of space technology to boost LAC countries' scientific, technological, and industrial development. Active participation of LAC countries in China's manned space program. Development assistance to LAC countries without attaching any political conditions. Not exactly what they get from the IMF and the Wall Street today. And finally, information on poverty alleviation, as well as experience in targeted poverty alleviation. And everyone in Ibero-America and throughout the world knows what China has done to alleviate poverty, pulling 850 million people out of poverty in 40 years. And people say, if China can do it, why not we? And just think of this, put yourself in the shoes of a young global South leader, or even an older one, who looks at this and says, well, what is our future going to be? What's our choice? It's somewhat of a no-brainer, right? But just to make sure, let's take a look at what the actual major development projects are that China has developed over the last 20 years approximately in Ibero-America, either built them or proposed them that have then been sabotaged by Wall Street. These are just the major ones. This is not comprehensive. Everyone knows about the Chancay port in Peru. Built, done, there. The Bioceanic Railroad is under discussion between China and Brazil and also with Peru, not yet built. Mutun, right under that. This is one of the world's most gigantic iron ore deposits in Bolivia. And China helped Bolivia to develop the first steel plant in the entire history of the country. Bolivia has always exported, like any third world country, its primary resources, like iron ore, never had steel. Now they have steel. And then the Nicaraguan Canal, this is a project for a new sea level canal, greatly needed if world trade is to increase across Nicaragua. It's on hold. And then also proposals for high-speed rail lines, which the Chinese have made with concrete proposals. Panama was accepted. It was never built. The idea is to build the line straight through all of Central America. 2 or 3 such lines were proposed for Mexico. from Mexico City to Querétaro and then across the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, also sabotaged by Wall Street and the British. So, but this is the kind of stuff that they are offering for the Western Hemisphere. It's the kind of stuff that's being done in Asia and being done in Africa. But this is what is on the table. So finally, now let's compare this to what the United States has helped build by way of big infrastructure projects in the same region also over the last 20 years. So this is China, and this is the United States. No, it's not a mistake. There's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. And so countries around the world, but especially in this region, look at this and say, well, it's kind of a no-brainer what kind of world we need. The crucial issue here is we have to have the kind of cooperative development with the United States, with Europe, that the Chinese themselves are proposing, this trilateral cooperation offer, because that kind of reorganization on a global scale is a total change in the parameters of the entire world system to a different kind of approach, different than a multipolar world. This is not multipolar, what we're talking about. Multipolar, as we've repeatedly said, incorporates the idea of geopolitics, and you can see where geopolitics leads you. So this was just a brief excursion into the actual primary sources rather than reading media accounts, so people can get a sense of what the actual issues are on the table strategically around this Venezuela question. Thanks.
Thank you, Dennis. I'm going to preempt the questions already coming in for your presentation images. So please, if you could post them in there, I'm positive people are already going to ask.
Yeah, I figured I'd have them.
Yeah, super useful. I also just want to note just the importance of the development projects. And I see there's a lot of young people on. If you are interested in getting active and involved in discussing making more of these projects and having these things put on the table, please reach out, whether that's over the Zoom or you can reach out to questions@schillerinstitute.com, especially if you're a young engineer. So I just wanted to put that out there for people who are tuned in right now. So thank you, Dennis. Next, I'd like to go to, and I apologize for the mix-up, Professor Eduardo Siqueira. He's Professor Emeritus in Public Health at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, as well as a Brazilian researcher. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Siqueira. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Can you hear me? Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this panel. It's a pleasure to be involved in a network to support peace, because unfortunately, there has been a lot more talk about war than peace, and that's a problem. We are moving from one war to another war to another war, and that's not good. When the world is focusing too much on wars and not on peace, that means there's something very wrong that we need to fix. I will not repeat what was already said. I'm just going to add some details about the new old gunboat, literally gunboat diplomacy that we're seeing by the United States in the Caribbean. It seems to me that it's an old story, especially from the beginning of the last century, and we are seeing a repetition of this. The United States decided to put on paper what many intellectuals and leaders in Latin America always considered to be the real policy of the United States, which is forget diplomacy. You're going to do what we want, and if you don't do it, we're going to threaten you in many ways. And what we are seeing now, which is different than in the past, is the variety of ways the United States is using its military power to make countries do what is against their own interests. So the notion of hybrid wars, psychological warfare, is being used against Venezuela for a while now. And for those of you who are not familiar with how much the US has done this in Venezuela, I've been following this for 20 years. I've been in Venezuela a few times. This started since Commander Chavez took power. And since then, the United States has used a number of ways to defeat and to create regime change in Venezuela. There was a coup that was defeated. They tried to bribe the military, the leaders, some of the leaders of the Venezuelan military were not successful. They tried to force into the Venezuelan people candidates that were totally artificial. Juan Guaidó was one, and the new one is Corina Machado, who outrageously was given a Nobel Prize, a person who actually said publicly that she wanted the oil of Venezuela to be explored by US interests, US companies. So there is a history of almost a couple of decades of all types of interventions, overt and covert in Venezuela, including using what was before, I would say, mercenaries in Colombia to invade the country in previous regimes in Colombia. So it seems to me that what we're seeing now is an overt policy that was clearly spelled out by Dennis of considering Latin America the backyard. And in such a way that the threats have become not only overt in terms of military, but also politically. Marco Rubio should be called Narco Rubio, because what actually happened recently was the pardon of one of the major drug dealers and drug traffickers from Honduras that was pardoned at the same time that the government says they are actually trying to stop the flow of narcotics to the United States. And what we are seeing is the pressure being put in many countries in Latin America. And if you look at the map of South America especially, you're going to see that President Trump is overtly interfering in national elections. It did this recently in Argentina when it blackmailed the government in Argentina, the people in Argentina. If they didn't vote for Milei and his candidates, they would not be given money and loans that assumedly Argentina needed for its current accounts. The same is happening now in Honduras, where the election that's been considered illegal by two of the major parties in Honduras, and it's being considered illegal. And Trump actually said, and lied, of course, many of his lies, that if the people in Honduras did not vote for the candidate he supported, another fascist that he supported, neo-fascist that he supported, they would not get their remittances. They would not allow the Honduran immigrants to send money to Honduras. In other words, blackmailing again, blackmail Argentina, blackmail Honduras. We now have the recent election in Chile where another neo-fascist was elected. So it seems to me that from the one hand, there's military force being used, threats being used, as well as the CIA. Let's not forget that. In Venezuela, probably what's going to be used is some sort of regime change, color revolution from the inside. That seems to be the tactic that's being used. I don't think there will be an invasion, but definitely a lot of pressure, a lot of psychological pressure, so that people, maybe some folks in Venezuela would actually do the job together with the CIA or directed by the CIA, led by the CIA. And the same is being applied in other countries. In Bolivia, we had elections recently again, the right wing, not necessarily the neo-fascist, but an ally was elected. We have a very bad situation in Ecuador, the same way in Peru. So in other words, in many countries in South America, and probably the same will happen in Central America. It's already happening in El Salvador, as you know, now Honduras, and probably all the others. the United States is trying to create a situation where you have puppet regimes totally dependent and subordinate to the United States, because this is the new policy. Either you do what I want, or I'm going to boycott, I'm going to sanction, I'm going to invade, I'm going to bomb, and I'm going to create psychological warfare. And I don't want to de-emphasize this, because the psychological warfare has been happening in Venezuela for decades, as well as support to so-called non-profit organizations, such as many that develop in these countries by the National Endowment for Democracy. It has been well documented in the past how much money the United States was doing through the USAID and National Endowment for Democracy to create, especially amongst the youth, opportunities for color revolutions. So if you see this whole picture, what you actually are seeing, and it's being clearly spelled out in the national strategy, the new national strategy, is a situation where the United States consider all these countries to be countries that have resources that should belong to the United States, especially oil. On the other hand, what's at stake is a permanent war, which is not really war, because no country in Latin America is declaring war against the United States. They have been invaded. The correct word is these are invasions, military invasions of these countries. That's what's being planned. And oil being the strategic resource that it is, as Dennis already mentioned. Also, the rare minerals. And then I'll come to the most important country in the Americas. That's actually probably the one that's the golden target for the United States, which is Brazil, which has the second largest resources for so-called rare minerals or strategic minerals. After China, Brazil is definitely the one that has, especially niobium. And it seems to me that the United States clearly spelled out that those resources belong to us, belong to the United States. And unfortunately, they are in your countries, but it should belong to us. And if you don't follow our rules, we're going to take them over one way or the other to create a situation of threats and fear. And of course, in many of those countries, we have elites that have been supporting the pillage and the plundering of those countries in alliance with multinational corporations, mining or oil corporations. So when these countries nationalized their oil resources, it was basically because oil is a very important source of resources for any country that has sufficient resources to develop its economy. So what the United States is basically saying to those countries is, I'm going to take over, and I'm not going to allow you to have sovereignty and independent development. Contrast this with China. China has a totally different policy or strategic future opportunities for these countries to develop in any number of ways, in economic ways, in technological ways, in political ways, etc., in cultural ways. China has a whole different perspective. And I believe what we are seeing is an empire who is desperate. The United States has enormous financial crisis to solve. It created this so-called tariff racket. I call this a racket because the United States people are the ones who are paying for these tariffs. In the case of Brazil, it was not successful, but it seems that there's politics being played in a way that let's not squeeze Brazil now, let's squeeze all the other countries, and Venezuela being the number one, and then later on we'll figure out what we can do to Brazil. It seems that what Trump is trying to do is trying to neutralize Brazil's opposition to its policies by offering some possibilities of deals and negotiations. But overall, the situation in Latin America and the Caribbean is such that what the United States is creating, we already saw this in the 60s, is fertile ground for massive opposition to the United States. And although right now we are not seeing this as developed as it will be in the future, I believe especially the youth, but not only the youth, we are going to see many of those countries raising up against this threat. And I don't think that Venezuela will allow the United States to be successful. In case you didn't know, since Chavez, the Venezuelan population has been organized, trained, given weapons to resist. There is a clear military strategy to do that, and I don't think these threats will be successful. The fact that Trump is postponing seems to me that he was probably giving real information about the potential threats, military threats, if he tries to do what he's intending to do. The pressure will continue. The psychological warfare will continue. The hybrid warfare will continue. Possibilities of creating situations in Venezuela, which has a divided population, by the way. Nobody can deny that. But a lot of the puppets of the United States in Venezuela do not have really a lot of support. They are very divided. The interests that they have are not convergent in unity against the Maduro's government. So I don't think they'll be successful. But we all know this president likes adventures. And although he's saying he's going to do this, he's going to do that, probably what he wants to get at the end is some negotiation where Venezuela will allow U.S. companies to explore the oil. And all these lies, Stephen Miller, all these lies that are being said pretty much every other day, that Venezuela did that, narco traffic, and then they stole our oil. They keep changing the narrative, but the real issue is the United States wants to control the oil resource of Venezuela, as well as, and that's not something to not to consider as very important, to block China's influence and economic support to Latin America. And that is clearly the case in Brazil. China has made successful negotiations in Brazil. They are growing. And because Brazil is part of the BRICS, I'm quite sure that this is the real enemy the United States wants to neutralize and, if possible, control. So it seems to me that what we're seeing now is just the beginning of this new policy, overtly. But for those of us who've been in the Americas for a while, we don't see this as new, especially in the case of Venezuela, decades of this, and in many other countries in Latin America, the same situation has been seen in the past. Now, at least we can see that's overt. It's not something that's hidden. And this is happening partially or to a large extent because what you see in the United States desperate to control the Americas in a different way. And I don't think the national strategy spelled out everything that the United States wants to do. I believe the United States continues to keep the idea that it is the hegemon and it has to change its strategy because it cannot dominate the world that it used to do. But that doesn't mean that it will give you some free range from Russia or China in Eurasia, as you are seeing, giving money to Taiwan, billions of dollars to Taiwan, as well as threatening color revolution in several of the former Soviet republics. So it's not the United States is saying, that's okay, Russia, you can do what you want in your sphere of influence, China, you can do what you want in your sphere of influence. Not really. It's basically saying, since I can't continue to do what I used to do, I'll change my strategy to some extent to control what I actually can control. But I'm not going to allow you to continue to have free range on your sphere of influence. It's a change of tactics, in my opinion, not necessarily that the United States gave up the idea that it is a hegemon. But on the other hand, I see positive changes in the sense that the United States understood that it cannot continue to keep its policy as it used to do. It's a hegemon in decline, it's an empire in decline, and it's showing signs of desperation. And that's very dangerous to the world to have a country such as the United States repeating what the British Empire did in the past, creating more wars, creating more conflict, creating more ways of dividing the other countries that are trying to unite, especially the BRICS. So that's what I would like to say for now, and thank you very much for inviting.
Thank you very much, Professor Siqueira. I want to go to Helga, who I believe, Helga, you have some remarks on what's been said thus far.
I just want to very briefly thank you, Jack, for having made this compassionate and I would even say agapic appeal for people to change. Because I was very moved when you told us aspects of your biography. And, you know, in light of the long fight you have been involved in, I find it very, very important that you still have this absolute, you know, desire to create a culture of love and not a culture of hatred, and not a culture of death, but a culture of life. So I wanted to thank you for that, because that's exactly what young people need to hear.
I believe he said thank you. You were muted, Jack, but I could read your mouth. Thank you. Okay. Well then, unless you want to say something, Jack, I see you're looking at your computer.
The only thing that I'd like to say is that I don't think I focused enough on students. I did mention them on and off, but the point that I was trying to make is that, as Dennis noted, that we don't have to wait until 2045. Obviously, there are young people out there working today, and it's great that you had that conference where you could bring them to the point that they've got to change the narrative that militarism, the merchants of death, and the philosophy of might makes right has got to change, and it will change. And I just thought the presentation about the Dennis made, especially, and the professor made, both of those presentations about Central America, South America, the Caribbean, is so vital for what is happening today. I have traveled extensively in Venezuela myself. My wife and I have visited especially Cuban doctors who live in barrios where the wealthier medical doctors from Venezuela would not bother to work with the people. But there were the Venezuelan doctors, or rather the Cuban doctors, and the Cuban nurses working with the poorest of the poor, right outside of Caracas, right on the hills of the mudslide hills of Caracas. Here we have this compassion and love of the Cuban people. So there's so much to learn from Venezuelan people, and I really appreciate the professor and that wonderful presentation by Dennis as to what the Chinese have been trying to do diplomatically. Kissinger, of course, who had said in his biography that they're strange. The Chinese are strange. They don't have the same tactics that we have and the same motivation. We've realized that Kissinger more or less implied that force is the best way to do it. And with 800 bases around the world, and with the history of the United States Army School of the Americas in Latin America, I spent 6 months in prison for simply trying to deliver petitions to close a training school of the United States military in Fort Benning, Georgia. Simply, we had over 100,000 petitions to close the school and to teach the people of Latin America ways to improve their economy and improve their lifestyle. But we were arrested and put on trial and sent to Atlanta Penitentiary and the Petersburg prison. That sort of attitude where a federal marshal said to me, "You were a school teacher, right? Well, we're going to teach you a lesson." That kind of activity, of course, is part of the American culture, and that's going to change with the Z generation and with the Alpha generation. I have every belief in that. And yes, I am 90 years old, so I've been around a bit. Thank you very much.
Well, you don't sound a day over 20. Yeah, thank you for everything that you've done so far. And we look forward to more of what you're going to do with your activism. Thank you so much, Jack. You're a great example to many people.
See you in 10 more years on this program. And that, by then, the Z generation will have come into power, and that better things will happen. We've got to have hope. we have, and you guys are working on the issue of hope and concern and justice, but speaking out as you have been. What is this, the 133rd week? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. Thank you for the kind words and encouragement. Actually, speaking of that, we do have a number of participants who have joined us from Africa, from South America, from many places around the world. But I just want to say a special hello to some young folks who have tuned in from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I believe also from Uganda. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome. We love having you on. And we will go to a report actually from our friends in Uganda, our friend Timothy. Why don't we pull him up?
Greetings everyone and whoever is participating in this International Peace Coalition. My name is Timothy Ninsima and I'm with my friend
Emmanuel Mungatihe from Kampala, Uganda.
On December 14th, last Sunday, we held an international youth conference which was organized by the Schiller Institute and attended by different youth across the world, but also had the opportunity of hosting it here in Kampala physically at Kampala Emerald Hotel.
Ugandan youth came in and had a great insight with great inspiration from different speeches which were given by different people during this event. For example, the statement which came in from Mr. Jacques clearly stating that the future is Africa and humankind originated from Africa, just adapted to different environments in the different part of the world. These statements clearly had great impact into the Ugandan youth, including us with the organizers of this event here in Uganda, as well as a statement which came in from Mrs. Helga Zepp-LaRouche, who stated that every country has a right to develop. Such insights left us differently and made us to becoming great leaders of Africa.
But there's no way we could achieve development for our countries without advocating for peace. We cannot be blind by the events which are happening in Congo, which borders us. For example, I personally come from Western Uganda, which borders Congo, and I see millions of refugees who are coming into our country to seek for refuge. But when you talk to most of them, all they need and advocate for is peace. We should create conditions which make the Congolese stay in Congo. And also look at how the world is. Look at Sudan, where we've created a biggest humanitarian crisis just because two sides are fighting each other and supported by different countries. That nonsense must stop. In Africa, we don't make guns, but we fight each other using the guns manufactured from other countries.
This one brings us to another statement which was stated by Dr. Nalenda Pandor from South Africa, who advocated for Africa Agenda 2063, and the major point that we picked is that the guns must silence. In so doing, Africa will have a right and peaceful way to develop and industrialize, boosting the economy as well as the inter-Africa countries' relationship to trade and have different minds coming together in order to have a great impact for Africa.
So we call upon the youth across the world to advocate for peace in Africa and also in different parts of the world. The only way we could achieve development is through advocating for peace, and it also starts here in Africa, because if Africa is free, the world will be free. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and we wish you a fruitful International Peace Coalition.
See you next time.
See you next time. Bye.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in and for participating, and we look forward to more collaboration with you, Timothy. All right. Well, next we're going to bring in our friend Estavo, who's with the Schiller Institute in Brazil. He came to the conference. It was really wonderful to meet you in Paris, and we got to go out and organize together, and we went to various campuses, discussed with many young people getting active and creating a new paradigm. And it was an absolute joy to be able to do that with you. It was a really fun dynamic having so many different people from all over the world in one place in Paris, discussing and organizing all these different people around the same ideas. We're coming from many different cultures, so this was very, very fun. Why don't we pull up Estavo?
Hello everyone, my name is Estevão and I am a member of the Schiller Institute in Brazil. It's a pleasure to me to be joining in this IPC meeting. Exactly 1 month ago, during the second week of November, I had the chance and the honor to participate in the Schiller Institute Youth Conference held in Paris in France. And during that event, fellow youth members from many parts of the world came together to propose solutions for some of the pressing issues facing our contemporary society. And I truly believe that the experiences we all had in those days in Paris instilled in our hearts a healthy sense of urgency. We all came to the conclusion that humanity needs to be driven to a new direction, to a new paradigm. To achieve that, we need to re-elaborate our security and development architecture. Political decisions, as Ms. Helga Zepp-LaRouche has been emphasizing, have to take into consideration the interests of others. We have to bring back the principles of the Westphalia Treaty held in 1648, where the right to self-determination came as an incredible device to foster peace and cooperation among nations. The Schiller Institute members in these last weeks following our event in Paris mobilized a fantastic degree of effort to prepare and host another youth conference where these humanistic views could again be spread. And this conference was actually held. Panelists and speakers addressed crucial topics regarding our current political and economical situation. And among many staggering discussions we had in the two panels, I personally would like to endorse some statements made by Ms. Helga Zepp-LaRouche and Dr. Naledi Pandor in their respective presentations. Ms. Helga, in the first part of her speech, she particularly brought a discussion about how her late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, saw the death of the Bretton Woods system in 1971 as a nefarious turning point in the history of the West. The revocation of the Bretton Woods allowed the establishment of a floating exchange system. Therefore, it opened the grounds to the financial system to pursue speculative enterprises. It is precisely one of the main challenges for us nowadays to bring a new security and development architecture, because the financial system is draining the wealth of nations through endless speculation. And that's why we need the reenactment of the Glass-Steagall law, because with Glass-Steagall, the banks which are focused on speculation these banks would be dismissed and dismantled. Under Glass-Steagall, only the banks solely willing to give credit to people to produce on the physical economy, these banks would have the incentives and the deposits of the government. Therefore, under Glass-Steagall, we would combat this current financial system that came into the world since 1971, and we would also propose a new possibility for humans to thrive, develop, and flourish. Dr. Nalini Pandor, the former Minister of International Cooperation for the Republic of South Africa, she discussed the importance of ethos, the importance of people taking care of their souls. So Dr. Pandor advocated and gave us advice for the youth people in that conference. She said that we couldn't be solely concerned with materialistic life, but rather Dr. Pandor inspired us all, saying that human beings are not creatures merely fighting for survival, but rather we are endowed with creative faculties. She inspired us to nourish, to foster, to bring out this good ethos that we all have inside, because that's the only way for us to achieve long-lasting peace in the world. So I would like to conclude this brief report with you on these grounds, also inspiring you, for those of you who haven't watched the conference yet, I would highly recommend for you to check it out, the recorded video in your social medias. But overall, I believe that having this sense of mobilization, and we could see it in your online conference on Sunday, gives us hope, gives us a sense of that we can believe that there is a way out of all these injustices and problems we see in our reality. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Gustavo, for sending in this very excellent report. I definitely do want to encourage people to watch the video, and I'll make sure to include the link for the video on the Zoom chat, and you can catch it also at schillerinstitute.com. It's one of the first items on the website. But I would also like to bring in my friend Carla, who's from the Bronx, New York City, United States. She also was in Paris, who I had the pleasure to work with while we were there, and had a lot of many fascinating and wonderful discussions. Thank you so much for joining us, Carla. Please go ahead. You have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. Since the Paris conference and the presentation on the Bering Strait, no, not Bering Strait, I think it is the Bering Strait Canal Bridge, the conceptual plan that would draw trade, train, transportation for both people and material items in between the Eurasian continent and the tip of Alaska, between Russia and Alaska. It gave me it reminded me of all of the technical writing that I, who am studying to be an engineer, goes through to ensure that all of the nitty-gritty details of any of these kinds of developments that would help bolster economic growth and international development and international trade and collaboration between countries needs to go through to ensure that these plans become solidified in the real world, and that they can that these kinds of initiatives can be easily translated from paper to actual building and tangible tangible progress. So after the conference in France, I made sure to defer to Daniel and Aska for advice on how I should proceed with the work that I would be planning to do. And I have a lot of really, really good news. I was able to connect to the Students for Justice in Palestine in City College of New York, from where I transferred out. They have been really, really active, and they were some of the first students that started the encampments, seeing the initial attacks on Palestine, and both the SPJ on CCNY campus and Columbia, of whom I'm trying to reach out to, are very, very interested. All of the students are very interested in better understanding how their activism can then be assisted and lifted up more by collaboration between organizations and institutions like us, like the Schiller Institute, and how they can quickly and easily disseminate more information about the general economic state that we see ourselves in, and all of the interplay of the general. I've started to call it organized crime of the United States government, and the possibilities of economic collaboration and development internationally. So then I was able to actually have a one-on-one conversation with the president of the SPJ and City College of New York. She was ecstatic over the ideas, right? When I was telling her about not only the Schiller Institute, but the work that I'd been involved in terms of proposal writing, proposal planning, in my own time, in terms of my studies as an engineer, but also the Bering Strait corridor plan, and just how ideas like that, concepts like that, can easily be picked up, started on, and put into writing and proposed to different institutional bodies. And even if they don't pick it up as quickly as our moral consciousness asks for it, then that's not to say that the Bering Strait plan hasn't been picked up now, 50 years later after it was first written. So in that conversation with the president of the SPJ, she was really ecstatic not only to have speakers from the Schiller Institute, more collaboration between the Schiller Institute, and just generally seeing me around more, seeing how excited she was to see how knowledgeable I was in terms of in terms of our economic state, in terms of the way our the speculation of our money, the AI bubble, and just all of the things that we've come to know and that entrench our development into this grotesque idea of what an economy should look like in terms of for its people. And I guess really I'm most excited to see the development of these connections, the development of new proposal writing, being able to show more students the Oasis plan and how these kind of developmental ideas should be paving the way for our futures. And I've been kind of marinating this concept of deferring to, I'm not very well versed in how BRICS operates, and since they're a fairly new apparatus of organization in terms of just my understanding of it, I admit that I'm not as knowledgeable in it as I should be, but deferring to BRICS when it comes to bringing any of these new proposal plans that might come out of my work with the SBJ, and seeing if China's Belt and Road Initiative and any of these other plans. Well, the Belt and Road Initiative is already, in motion, and it would continue to develop if not for, the American, interventions and their attempts at stopping the Belt and Road Initiative by now basically declaring war on Venezuela. But basically, knowing that BRICS is showing itself to be a more level-headed and clear pathway towards stable economic development for all nations, all peoples, without the malicious intentions of undermining the governmental structures of the countries that they collaborated in the, antiquated London-esque British way that America tends to whenever it wants to whip up any type of economic penalties on countries that America considers or has claimed to be an ally to. And so that's kind of where I've been pivoting to, just the economic writing and the trying to generate plans like the Belt and Road Initiative, like the Bering Strait Initiative, writing up proposal plans that would work in that way, and help using the skills, the help, and collaboration of my fellow students to get the ball rolling on things like that. Because I know that a bunch of people have a lot of ideas, but just no platform like the Schiller Institute to integrate that into their activism. And while the encampments really cause a shockwave internationally, and I find that it's a lot easier for students to organize now than it was before because of the encampments both on CCNY and Columbia, I am glad that there is such an appetite to continue to do their work and add to their activism in the ways that we could find to be the most effective.
That's great, Carla. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing, the report, the activism you're doing. This is excellent. This is exactly what people should be doing right now. And the fact that you're taking your expertise and as a young engineer and using that in what going out and talking to people, this is wonderful. This is really wonderful.
This is why I was so excited in France. And then when I saw some of these ideas brought up again earlier this week in the last youth conference, I was basically like writing down any idea that I could pick up on, any idea that I had seen from our speakers, and just seeing if there was anything in particular that I heard from meeting the Students for Justice in Palestine on CCNY, seeing if there was anything in particular that I could bring back to them and generate that kind of dissemination of information. Because there are a lot of students whose heart is in the right place, who know morally, who have the moral conviction and can stand on the moral convictions of what is right and wrong in terms of how they see international policy, but just don't have the, I would phrase it as the intellectual basis to stand on. They don't have a foundation of economic policy. They don't have a foundation of the history of some of these things. And when I brought it to the last meeting that they had for the semester, they were like, "Oh my God, Carla, you're so knowledgeable. Thank you for coming. We're really excited to work with you." Phrases like that, because, it's not, sorry. There's, I've spent a lot of time both in my engineering studies, but also in understanding international policy, into different systems of economics, political science. I thought that initially, if I was going to major in engineering, that I would minor in political science, knowing how those kinds of systems intertwine, especially when it comes to civil engineering. So it was always, you know, this has always been something that I've worked on tirelessly, and I'm very glad that the Schiller Institute, or I found you guys, and that I can then help more people like me who are like-minded to find the pathways towards peace, because this is really what the whole idea is: peace through development, peace through. I always wondered, hey, why can't America has this whole story about peace, and we're going to war for peace, but we never go into countries with our teachers and carpenters and engineers and the people who, you know, sociologists would say would bring the best development, would quell the violence that we see, that would bring the most peace. So, you know, this is my this is my jam.
Well, you found more jams is so wonderful. I'm just going to make a quick transition because our technical person has to leave right now. So I'm just going to make a quick announcement. Stay on. We're going to go to the discussion period. If you're on over the live broadcast, please go to schillerinstitute.com to participate during the discussion period. Right on the top of the website is the RSVP page to get the Zoom link. And with that, Dave, let me know when we've cut the stream.